In this section, I am going to discuss data validation using JavaScript. Right? So, how to collect data in website? Usually, we use web forms like this. Right? So, this is a web form or HTML form which is developed to collect data from students. Right? So, in here there are number of fields, registration number. So, in here, user has to follow this format. Otherwise, it will be in a incorrect format. So, user may keep this fields empty. Then it is incorrect. So, sometimes he or she may enter registration number in a different format. That is also incorrect. So, full name, usually they can insert nothing, that is they keep this can empty, right? So we have to validate this so that user cannot insert invalid data, for example uh, date of birth, right? So let's discuss how to do that using JavaScript. All right, so why do we need data validation? Because actually the client side form validation is very important, because we have to collect a valid data from the user. Otherwise those collected data is useless, right? So usually user may ignore those things, but in developer side or in programmer side, uh, they have to collect valid data from the user. That means they have to do some restrictions, right? So client side form validation should be included in web forms using JavaScript, right? So why? We have to minimize the errors. We can't what you call we can't uh, uh, get 100% correct data, but we can minimize the error, right? We can minimize the errors, right? So there is also a possibility of using a server-side validation for the web forms, but a client-side validation makes less processing time used in server machine, right? So which improve the server performance as well. So therefore, the client-side data validation is very important thing, right? Okay, so what do we need to validate? All right. So what needs to be validated usually up to the web programmer. User has left required fields empty. That means, so let's see a name. Name cannot be empty. All right. So if you take a particular student, his phone number can be empty. Right. So that means she or he does not have a mobile phone, but probably they must have their name, right? So user has left a required fields empty, then that is incorrect. Therefore, we have to validate it. That means we have to restrict it. So without this name, the form cannot be submitted. All right. And the user has entered text in a numerical field. So for example, we ask a student age, then they enter a set of characters. That is incorrect, right? So we are asking his age in numeric form, likewise, right? A user has entered a valid email address. So we have to check whether that email address is valid. That means we have to check the format, right? Text, at sign, something like that, right? So let's see how to do that. In that next case is a user has selected an option from the radio buttons. Sometimes say gender. Then there are two values, male and female. Then probably user has to select one of them, right? So we can't keep empty that particular values. Likewise. Next one is user has to enter data in incorrect format, right? Incorrect format or incorrect format. That, for example, is a date of birth. So user has to enter incorrect format, right? So likewise, we have to consider those things when you validate data. So for example, so this is a simplest form, first name and last name, right? So here, so these are two fields, all right? So we call these are required fields. Required fields. Required fields means user cannot submit this form without inserting values for these two. All right. So once they try to submit this, then in client side validation, uh, we have to block it. All right. So let's see how to do this. All right. So here JavaScript function is called when a form is submitted. Right. So we have to call to the defined JavaScript function. Then we have to check whether these fields are empty or not. So if it is empty, we have to block the submission. So let's see how to do this. Right. Okay, then I'll create this web form, right? So in a HTML web page, so I'll create a basic HTML web page, all right? So HTML, and then this head section, all right? So head, and then this is the body section, all right? Right. So in here I put a title called uh, say form validation. All right, then I save this one as a validation example number one. So I have a folder called JavaScript and subfolder called validation. Say form1.html. All right. So in here I uh, use a form tag to create the form, and then the name is say student information. Say student info, and then submission method is a get or post, and then here I submit this action. Say action is a bc, or say get student info. I don't have this file, but I'll put this action and then close the form. Then now I'm going to have two text fields. Say input, say type is text, say name or IDs, say here student, say first name, say first name, and then the value is empty. Then I put break tag. So for time saving, I'll take the same input, and then I'll say this is text, and then name is in the here say last name, and then I'll put the same tag for time saving. In your case, you have to type this, right? So here I use this, sorry, I remove this break tag, and then this is submit button. So input type is submit, and here the type is say reset. Now you know this, right? Here we don't have name, we don't need to set names. Say value is say submission. So here we say cancel. All right, okay. So here, so this is my folder validation form one. Okay, here actually here I don't need to put a break. All right, okay, I keep like this. All right, so here I put the say heading level one, say student information. Okay, this is level one, sorry, crossing level one. Okay, this is the basic form, right? So when it is submit, now it is submitted to the say this particular file gets to studentinfo.php. So here first name is empty, last name is empty. All right. So actually without first name or last name, we can't submit this form. Actually here we have to put the label, right? First name. Here we can say uh, second name. Oh, sorry, last name. Last name. Okay, now this. Okay, so if you want, you can use tables for alignment for align these elements, right? So here first name and last name. Okay, okay, now it's correct. Okay, all right. So without a value for these two fields, we have to block this submission. Now it is submitted without value. So how can we do this, right? So we can use JavaScript for this, right? So here I use JavaScript. So in head section, now you know how to use JavaScript in head section, right? So we do a lot of examples in here, right? So we did it in JavaScript fundamentals, and now I create a script tag, right? Okay. Then I use a script, then the type is a text JavaScript. All right, so this is my script tag, script. All right, so here I define function called say function, sorry, function say validation, right? Then I define this function like this, okay, right, validation. So when it is called to this function, so when you submit this form, we have to call, actually before we submit, or when we submit this form, we have to call to this validation function. When this submit, right? So when we are submitting this form, that is in here. In here, I define say on submit, right? On submit, I call to this function. So this is how we call return say function name validation. Return means we have to get the whether this is true or false, right? So that's why we call a return validation, right? So when we submit this function, so when we submit this form, right? So I call to this validation function, return validation. So this is this validation function, validation. All right. So let's see. Okay, let's see. Now I call this validation function. So in here, if I say return say false, return false, right? So if this is false, this form is never submitted, right? So now I set return false, refresh this, and I submit. Now you can see this form is never submitted, right? Because so when it is submitting, right? So when it is submission time, so here I call to the validation function. So we call on submit, right? That means when we submitting this form, so here I call to the validation function, right? So when submitting the web form, I call to the validation function. Then it's a false. So if it is false, this form is never submitted. So if it is true, this form is submitted, right? So whenever it is false, this is not submit. All right, so let's see. Now I set this one as true. Okay, save, right? Now we see it is submitted. But if it is a false, it is never submitted. So I'll check what is the value of this text field. How can I check it? So this is how we check it. You know this what you call document object model, right? So in this in this web page, we have a web page, we call this is in window, and then this is document. Inside the document we have a form, so we can remove the window part. Then we can say inside this document we have a form, right? So form name is student info, right? So we can say inside the document, so this is the form name student info, so this is the text box first name. So this is how we access it, document dot then the name of the form student info, then the text box, that is first name. All right, so if you want, we can say dot value. All right, then here I take the value of the first name text box, then I assign this one into the variable called say fn first name. All right, now we can check whether this fn is empty or not. How can I check it? So we can use if function, if, can say if n. So this is how we check it. So if it is empty, or it is null. All right, so you can use either method. Say it's better to use both, right? So here I check if fn is empty or fn is null. So if it is empty or not null, so what can I say? Please enter value for the name. All right, so here I can say alert enter name, enter first name, or we can say first name is required. All right, at the same time you can say, so if it is null we can return false, right? Let's see. Now first name is empty. Then when I try to submit this form, it says enter first name, right? So again I'll try, say enter first name. So when I after entering the first name I can submit it, right? So I can do the same thing for the last name as well, but in this case say I need only first name, or we can say first name is required field, right? This is called required field. That means that this value cannot be null or empty, right? So this is not required, that means this value can be null, right? That is depending on the requirement, right? Requirement. Okay, so this is my first validation of by using JavaScript, right?